Oh, and good evening. It's November 12th, 2024, and we're continuing our collection of discussions in our Outside the Class series. It's a series from the Bible Project about the entire TaNaK, the Old Testament. On TheDustyFeet.com, in the Outside the Class section, all those source videos are set up for your review. Because the intent of Outside the Class would be to listen to that in-class lecture first. And all the lectures can be found on that source video playlist. We're going to try to keep these to about 15 minutes or so. Make them easy to catch and easy to catch up on. So we're on a quest, scroll by scroll, book by book, a journey through this collection, but with a fun and different twist on Outside the Class, on the Dusty Feet. And before we forget, if you find these kinds of podcasts useful, you click that subscribe button. Those reminders, they just help you. But also, if you think these might be useful to others, that's when you click that like button, because that is how YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. So in this series, we're going to cover the entire TaNaK, the Old Testament, but the original order of this collection, right? The Hebrew Scriptures order. Thus, it could get interesting as we pass the first 5. Remember, the videos we're going to be discussing, they're always just the tip of the iceberg. They are part of our learning series that I highly recommend, and they can all be found on the Bible Project website. Because we're going to ask many questions about all kinds of things. Answers? We'll see. Numbers, Bamidbar. This is our part 6. We're going to wrap it up. So, remember last week we were talking about Balaam, and he's a gun for hire, right? The king of Moab, Balak, has charged him with cursing Israel. Remember where, again in this scroll of Numbers, you have stories between instructions, instructions and stories, stories, instructions, instructions, stories. Tim and John talked about this. And I think it's a fascinating part. So I highly suggest first that you review all of those instructions. Because if you look at them closely, I think you'll find that I think they're more related to these stories than one might think if you were just glancing at them. One of the things that I find fascinating about Scripture is that, like these 5 scrolls, the Torah as we call it, it's a grouping. These 5 scrolls are looked back upon. In other words, these are for them to remember the story, to go back. Because this is penned at the end. There's much discussion about all of it and where Deuteronomy fits, and I love conversing people with this. I just need to learn to be more relaxed about our discussions. But I want us to remember that these are combined into this look back, right? We see this also when we examine the Gospels. So believe it or not, it's an interesting thought. Because we view the Gospels in the same way we do because of how the stories are laid out, how they're assembled to tell a story, how they're arranged. Stories, life, Jesus, parables, teachings, instructions, parables. But here, Numbers is a beautiful example of this. It's interesting because you read instructions and then stories. It's an excellent story time. And you get to return to some instructions to help you guide, and then back to story time. In this part, we have this prophet, this oracle of God, who has the title of an oracle. Remember, oracles speak words from whomever they represent. Here, he represents Yod-He Vav-He, right? The story's obvious. He's speaking, and he's being told what to say by Yod-He Vav-He. This is a known prophet, because that's who Balak goes to have him go after these children of Israel. I just think it's interesting that you would ask a prophet from that God to curse the people from that God. That's a whole other set of discussions. But these complications, they're tossed into the story. Sometimes when we see these videos, these clips, these overviews, right? We think overviews cover the main parts of what's being told, and I think maybe that's something we need to think about. Just because we're listening to or reading some of these overviews, that those really are just really the main points. Because I think sometimes we're reading somebody else's or listening to somebody else's theology or the way they want the story to be told. So we tend to skip, not read the entire scroll, not look into the stories, just the Cliff Note versions. But suppose you read the complexities of some of these stories, like here, where we have an oracle of God talking to God in this story who is hired. Story is messy. And the first two oracles, those words are from God, said to Balaam, where God told him what to say. After the third oracle, Balaam goes back to Balak and he says, "Didn't I tell you initially that no matter what you gave me or how big the prize was, I will only say what God tells me to say?" And then, ending the Balaam story, fascinates me is that Balaam, he just goes home. Balak goes back to his throne. It's all we get at that moment. It's not like Balaam decided, hey, I think I want to join these people. He doesn't join them. There are more stories scattered throughout the TaNaK about people who they're not leading players, they're not part of the group, but they're very much followers of God and important to the story. Yet to be true about Numbers, I think one of the more prominent reasons this scroll does not receive the attention I think it deserves are the scenes towards the end. Because honestly, they can be a bit disturbing. Because this is essentially true when viewed, it really plays out when it's viewed through the lenses of our politically correct Western culture, democratic, literally over 3,000 years later in our culture, context lenses. But these stories, seen at the end of Numbers, to be honest, are some of the more complex and challenging than we see in all of Scripture. I mean, we get this horrible story about the daughters of Moab and the children of Israel. They've been in the area for some time. We don't know exactly how long, but this group seemed to not have learned their lessons. And they've mixed with the very group. This is the very group that wanted to curse them, right? The king from this group. So it seems like Balak, I think he got to him anyways. He just did it in a more subtle way. We get into Numbers 25, right? While Israel remained at Shittim, the people began to play the harlot with the daughters of Moab, for they invited the people to the sacrifices of their gods, and the people ate, bowed down to their gods. So Israel joined themselves to Baal of Peor, and the Lord was angry against Israel. As we move on, there's be words, phrases, elements of the stories, and the following stories. They're challenging at the least, disturbing again at most. Because not only are these folks, us folks, not learning our lessons and forgetting our past and commitment, but we're bound to continue this not so good trend. Because very few people, ordinary people in leadership, seem to be immune to this, right? We get to the parts are even difficult for me to grasp. Because the Lord said to Moses, again in Numbers 25, take all of the leaders of the people and execute them in broad daylight before the Lord, so that the fierce anger of the Lord may turn away from Israel. So Moses said to the judges of Israel, each of you slay his men who have joined themselves to Baal of Peor. Then behold, one of the sons of Israel came and brought to his relatives a Midianite woman. And in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the sons of Israel, while they were weeping at the doorway of the tent of meeting. When Phinehas saw Phinehas, that son of Eleazar, right, that son of Aaron the priest, when he saw it, he arose from the midst of the congregation, took a spear in his hand. He went after the man of Israel into the tent, pierced both of them through, the man of Israel and the woman, through the body. So the plague on the sons of Israel was checked. Those who died by the plague, 24,000. More counted, more dead, more forgetting. And again, we have a high priest's son that plays an integral, right, albeit challenging part of the story. Because Phinehas, we don't have time here to walk through this in depth, but it's very much something that you need, please, to read and talk amongst yourselves. Because then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, who turned away my wrath from the sons of Israel, because he was jealous with my jealousy amongst them, so that I did not destroy the sons of Israel in my jealousy. Therefore say, behold, I give him my covenant of peace. God is telling him, behold, I give him my covenant of peace. And it shall be for him and for his descendants after him, a covenant of perpetual priesthood, because he was jealous for his God and made atonement for the sons of Israel. After this, we get a new head count in 26, right? And at the end, it says, these are those who were numbered by Moses and Eleazar the priest, who numbered the sons of Israel in the plains of Moab by the Jordan at Jericho. But among these, there was not a man of those who were numbered by Moses and Aaron the priest, who numbered the sons of Israel in the wilderness of Sinai. For the Lord had said of them, they shall surely die in the wilderness. Not a man was left of them, except Caleb, the son of Jephunneh, and Joshua, the son of Nun. Later on, Moses goes on a hike with God, right? High on the Mount of Abrim. God gives him a view to behold. And he reminds him of the consequences of his prior actions. You know, at this moment, I know I would struggle with this, to be honest. Instead of being bitter for not being able to go in, we still see Moses' true heart, how he continues to intercede for them. Because in 27, he says, then Moses spoke to the Lord, saying, may the Lord, the God of the spirits of all flesh, appoint a man over the congregation who will go out and come in before them, who will lead them out and bring them in, so that the congregation of the Lord will not be like sheep with no shepherd. So the Lord said to Moses, take Joshua the son of Nun, a man whom is the Spirit, in whom, lay your hand on him. Have him stand before Eleazar the priest, before all the congregation, and commission him in their sight. It's a bit. Then we jump back into some essential, aren't they all, instructions. And then war. The vengeance of God against the Midianites. And it seems also the prophet, the once prophet of God, well, he's not spared. Seems he gave some lousy side counsel, and who he was didn't seem to help. We're not going to go into the details of that war now, yet it might be worth a discussion later, because it's disturbing, frightening, it's brutal. It's one of these passages that we find hard to reconcile with God, right? I'm right there with you. It's one that if we get all of God, we get all of God. Maybe this is in that category of maybe his ways are above our ways. But it's fitting as we get toward the end of this scroll. County enters the picture again, the triptych, right? Boy, it does date me with AAA, doesn't it? It's the recounting of where they had been these last 40 years. Some of those locations, they're dated. Most of them, though, are not. We also get a list of the new leaders of each of the tribes. This 40-year journey has been challenging for all of the leadership. And I would suspect it's a mantle that one would, if it was given to them, would take with caution, reverence. And one of the first things they get, it was their job as they entered the land to portion out the land of inheritance to each of their tribe's families. I bet that wasn't easy. We have Jericho in their sights. They're ready to enter the promised land. Plans are going to be made. The scroll of Deuteronomy awaits, the last scroll in this section we call the Torah. Before we started this, I had a feeling that many people didn't really realize that a big chunk of Exodus, the Leviticus, and the first 10 chapters of the Numbers, all that happens in a year, just a year. And after that, we have 40 years covered in 16 chapters. This generation that needed to be not let in, well, they go, and this is where their children learned. Their turn to pass on the tale. So the next scroll, Deuteronomy, it awaits. I can't wait to get to Jericho. Unexpected allies, personal choices. I'm looking forward to our next Outside the Class on the Dusty Feet.